A very wonderful good evening to all of you. I thank you for coming to support the constituency of St. Peter. This evening I have come to carry out the responsibility that is entrusted to me by the Constitution of Barbados to represent the people of St. Peter. Some people believe that representing constituencies is about fixing roads only or finding jobs for people, and those things are important. But representing people is all about being their voice. And if ever a time that the well-being of the people that I represent was under threat, and if ever there was a time that the people of St. Peter need to have not just a strong voice, but a strong voice, that time is now. And I've come once again to speak on behalf of the people who have sent me to Parliament. And I do so after 30 years of service. 30 years, almost to the day when I became the Member of Parliament for this constituency. I was still elated by the pleasure and the pride of being the voice for my mother, who meant more to me than anyone else in my life, my grandmothers, my friends, because I was the only Prime Minister ever to represent the constituency of his birth. This evening I have even more powerful reason. In this audience are my granddaughter and my daughter. And given the state of this society, sometimes I have to ask myself the question which I'm sure you too have to ask. What will we tell our children and our grandchildren? And this evening I've come, therefore, not just to speak in the name of the people of St. Peter and the people like Bess, Norma, all the others who have put me here. I've come to speak to the future and to speak in the name of your children and your grandchildren as I speak in the name of mine. And I like to speak to a theme. And the simple theme to which I speak this evening is to the government. And those of you like Rommel who is here this evening, Rommel, welcome. And Rommel, there's a song that you can sing that I may join you in. I ain't going nowhere, is here I intend to stay. And if it rise or fall, I ain't leaving at all. Welcome, Rommel. But those of you who would have served with me in cabinet would have heard me often tell my colleagues in cabinet forwards, fix it and fix it. And today somebody, given the state of this country, needs to tell this government, fix it and fix it. The election is over. It is well with my soul. I come here, as we go all over Barbados, not to seek vindication. I'm fulfilled. I do not seek veneration. But I want, like you, to live not just in a successful society, but to be sure that the society that my daughter and her children will inherit is more successful than the one in which I lived. The time for denials are over. The election is over. The incantations, Frondel, cannot create what reality denies. This country does not need any more announcements nor pronouncements. This country, believe me, has to come to terms with what is facing it. And there may be some things that the government will have to do that will embarrass it. I was made in the election campaign. It is well with my soul. And it is not about me now. But it was made to appear as if I'm untrustworthy. I'm fine with that. And I now have to seek the relief of the courts against a man who, to help a party, said that I had met with 3 other economists in a room at Capefield campus and had concocted a plan to send home 10,000 Barbadians. I live with those things, but without any sense of bitterness. But this country has a problem. It is the worst problem this country has ever had to deal with. And Frondel, face it. And fix it. Govern. We did not need Moody's report to tell us the true state of things in our land. For many of you, it is a lived experience. Nobody has to tell you that there is trouble in the land when there is trouble in your house. And when the ordinary Barbadian has a difficulty sometimes putting food, darling, be quiet. That's my granddaughter. That's her. But it's a lived experience. No sector in this economy is performing. We are in danger of becoming like an avalanche. Something that is going downhill under the pressure of its own weight and going downhill in a free fall, faster and faster. And there's a catastrophe awaiting us at the bottom of this fall. We are in a situation where the dynamics of what is happening in this country needs to be understood. What started as a problem in 2008 has been allowed to morph and morph and morph into other things. So it is not only about recession, it is not about unemployment. And I thought we had put the problem of unemployment behind us. It is about balance of payments problems. It is about a government that can't pay its bills. It is about a country, and the Dems have to be told these things, that youth wants to be held up before the rest of the world as a model for what a small country with so little to work with could achieve. But no country that is being laughed at. People saying they did not know that it is so bad. We have a multiplicity of problems facing us in this country. And they have to be dealt with. And they have to be dealt with because Barbados is in danger of being a society that does not have a viable economy. We are focused on the statement of Moody's, and I will come to that. But perhaps the most important statement that has been made recently has been made by Bernie Weatherhead. We are now an economy in which 60% of what happens to our economy, and with it, the well-being of Barbadians in general, depends on what happens in tourism. And if, as Bernie Weatherhead tells us, that the tourism industry itself is under pressure, and that come this summer, a large cross-section of the small hotel sector of Barbados may fail. If our leading sector fails, this economy can fail. And I urge Barbadians to take it seriously. There are others that have failed, and it will take a generation to bring it back. It has happened in Japan. In 1966, at independence, Singapore was less developed than Guyana. When they went to Jamaica in 1971, Jamaica was more developed than Barbados. But a country can undergo a prolonged period of decline if you have what is happening in this country. An avalanche coming down a hill, coming down under its own weight, and nothing is being done to stop it. And you have a government, sad to say, that is into denial. Government believing its own propaganda. A government believing that announcements and pronouncements will get the job done. A government that is taking the serious people from one piece of fiction to another, while a country is about to fail. And this evening I've come not just to criticize, but to explain. And the welfare of the people of St. Peter are my responsibility. And I want to talk about things that need to be done in this country to make sure that the people that I represent do not have to live in a failed society. And I was tempted to respond to what Friend Stewart said today, but a prime minister, former prime minister should not attack present prime ministers. But I will urge Fresnel before he bring the office into disrepute. And people start calling him Foolbird. Because he should be brief before he speaks. I never urged the media to tell him that before he says the kind of things that he says today. Don't take pride in ignorance of economic and financial issues. Take a brief somebody who knows. But I want to talk today in the context of the Moody's report and to point what needs to be done arising from the implications of that report. And the Moody's report really is not saying anything that we in the Barbados Labour Party have not been saying. Perhaps it takes somebody to come from abroad to open our eyes to that which we should be saying for ourselves. But there are two things in the Moody's report to which I want particularly to draw attention. The first is that the Moody's is telling us that the government financial return, Moody's has downgraded Barbados to the extent that it has predominantly for two reasons. The fiscal deficit for the year ended March, it said, is 11% of the GDP. And a lot of you don't understand what I mean. Let me explain it to you. And then it talks about monetary stability. And I want to talk about that. That has downgraded Barbados because the deficit has reached 11% of GDP. It is not inventing that number. Moody is telling you that it is downgraded Barbados 3 levels below junk because of the numbers presented to the House of Assembly. Not by Mayor Motley or by me, but by the Minister of Finance. When the Minister of Finance, so Moody's downgrade, despite what the government is trying to tell you, is based on the numbers that Chris Sinclair presented to the public. Now, last year, when He says the policies that we are about to institute will bring government public finances under control. And that at the very worst case, our deficit, with all of the pain I'm going to impose on you, the people of Barbados, should be no more than 5% of what the country produces. So the government objective with increasing the VAT and sending home people and whatever else was to have a deficit of 5% of GDP. And he had to come back to Parliament and says, our worst case scenario, the worst that could have happened to us is to have a deficit of 5.5. But I have to tell you, this deficit is 11. So that our fiscal situation is twice as bad as it should have been at its worst. Can you get your head around that? Our fiscal situation at its worst should have been 5% of the GDP. But the government and Sinclair reported in Parliament that it was 11. So it is twice as bad as its worst case scenario. Have any of you in this crowd this evening ever been in a situation where you're twice as bad off as the worst you thought you could have been? That is the situation facing your country. It is not something to laugh at. When a country's financial situation is twice as bad as the worst that it should have been, we are lucky that Moody's only reduced us by 3 notches. And then Moody's went on to say something that should be of concern to every Barbadian. He says, part of the government short-term debt has been financed by the printing of central bank, money by the central bank. While supportive of government's borrowing costs, such financing of the fiscal deficit put the country's currency pegged to the US dollar, long considered a critical element of our economic policy, under threat. So Moody's has downgraded us, and let me get the facts, principally for 2 reasons. Government public finances is twice as bad as they should have been at its worst. And the way in which the government budget is now being financed is predominantly by the printing of money. And Moody's is telling all investors that the printing of money by the Central Bank of Barbados has been the cause, not international recession, but has been the cause of the precipitous fall in the country's foreign exchange reserves. And if it does not stop, that which Barbadians have valued and have been the anchor of our stability, the peg, our dollar worth 2 to 1 US, that the peg is under threat. I take no pleasure this evening in coming to a place in Barbados to speak about our currency and its value being under threat. When I became the Prime Minister of Barbados and you were Minister of Finance, we had $387 million in foreign exchange reserves. By careful management, and the government that I was leading was not supposed to be doing anything right. This is the report of the government's economic report. Source Central Bank, I inherited $387 million in reserves. December 2007, we left $2,463 million in foreign exchange. Despite the fact that we were not supposed to be managing this country well, the government that they led increased the foreign exchange reserves of this country by over $2 billion. And they thought that we had succeeded in putting behind us forever any possibility of our currency ever coming under threat. And do you have any idea what it takes to be able to raise, because that is the country's savings, to save $2 billion in 14 years? There are things that the Labour Party did that I'm proud of. One was to ensure that unemployment could be brought down from 24% to 6%. But I truly thought, I really did, that we had put the prospect of a devaluation of the Barbados dollar behind us forever and forever. And you ask me why I speak in these passionate terms? Because I came to office as a prime minister, having to face the propaganda of an intellectual vandal, because that's what David Thompson was when he told you that I was not deserving of being a prime minister of this country because I had entered a secret deal with the IMF to devalue the Barbados dollar. And I was resolved that I was going to strain every sinew as a leader of this country to make sure that that propaganda did not turn out right, and that the country of my birth that I had the privilege to lead would be free of the specter of devaluation. And now the specter of devaluation stalks the land again. And this evening I've come not only to say face it and fix it, but to tell you that this country can fail. But it can only fail, be a good country. But our country can only fail if the institutions fail it. And I want to build on that message to you this evening. Our country can only fail if the Central Bank of Barbados refuses to do that which the laws of our land says that the Central Bank of Barbados must do. Our laws under the Central Bank Act did not contemplate that the central bank should put our currency value in peril and do nothing about it, or to put it in peril and then come after the horse has left the stable and try to catch it. Our laws put a duty of care on the central bank. And I spoke about it before Moody's when I spoke at the Legends of Barbados, and I want to repeat it today. Because it is important that the Central Bank of Barbados does not fail this country. And why do I say that? Moody's is now telling us that we have to downgrade Barbados because of things that can't be contested. That the central bank has been printing money, large sums, and they will continue to do so. Why? The government now has a rating called junk. Institutional investors abroad cannot knowingly take up people's money and invest in bonds or bills that are not investment grade. They have a duty of care not to invest in junk. The banks in Barbados are largely foreign owned. And they would have been told that you cannot take up people's money and continue to invest it in government bills if rating agencies say that those bills and bonds are not worthy of investing in. They are below investment grade. The institutions will have to make provision for bad debt if they continue to hold instruments that the rating agencies says junk. So the government has lost out on places from which to borrow. And it has virtually exhausted the national insurance And it has therefore kept calling upon the Central Bank of Barbados to buy more and more government treasury bills to pay its way. The printing of money rather than international recession is why our reserves are falling. Now, I tell you that I serve not only as a Minister of Finance, but I serve by appointment of Tom Adams as the Director of the Central Bank. And the Central Bank Act of Barbados, at Section 5, first of all, it says that one of the purposes of the bank must be to promote monetary stability. You hear that? That the dollar must be stable. And the central bank must do that which is necessary to keep the dollar stable. Now, Section 48 of the bank and Section 49 puts a duty of care on the bank, not to let a situation occur where it could become under threat. But I will read it to you as intelligent people. Whenever the total amount of credit, this is Section 48 of the Central Bank Act, whenever the total amount of credit being extended by the bank to the government, its institutions, agencies, and statutory boards by advances or by the acquisition of securities, so buying the treasury bills, threatened, not has, but threatened to endanger monetary stability. So the act don't tell the liable wait till you reach a stage where the stability of the dollar is under threat or can be under threat. But if you are lending money to the government by any means, and the extent to which you are lending threaten to bring about monetary instability, the bank shall make a report to the minister, drawing attention to the situation, analyzing the causes which have led thereto, and recommending measures which it deems necessary to forestall or otherwise remedy the situation. Moody's is telling us that it has had to downgrade Barbados 3 notches because the central bank has been printing money and it is undermining and threatening the stability of the Barbados dollar. The question that every Barbadian, and I am asking it on behalf of the people that I represent in St. Peter, has Dr. Worrell, in the face of the situation where the actions of the central bank in buying up government treasury bills by printing money complied with Section 48 of the Act that requires him to submit a report to the minister drawing attention to the situation. That's the first thing. And then, if after consultation with the bank, the minister is of the opinion that the policies being pursued by the bank are not adequate or conducive to the achievement of the bank as set out in Section 5, and Section 5 says the bank must promote monetary stability. So if the minister is not satisfied that what the central bank is doing or reporting to him will not get the job done, the minister shall send a written order to the bank determining the policy to be adopted by the bank, and the bank shall thereupon give effect to that policy while the order remains in operation. So, World should have written Sinclair, saying you're asking me to print enough money to pay the government's bills. They are threatening the monetary stability of Barbados. This is what I'm recommending you should do. And if Sinclair does not agree, he should give him a written letter. And by that order, the government and the Ministry of Finance would have assumed responsibility for the policy, not the central bank, of protecting the dollar. And this is what the law says should happen next. That the order acknowledging the government's assumption of responsibility for the policy should be published forthwith in the official gazette. And that the minister should cause to be laid before Parliament as soon as may be after the minister has informed the bank of the policy of the order determining the policy. Now, let me get serious. Moody's has said that it's had to downgrade us because monetary stability in this country is being threatened by the printing of money. The laws of the land set out what must obtain when our dollar is threatened by such action. And there are our employees. And they've come on behalf of the people of St. Peter, whose well-being may be threatened by this madness, to ask if the law has been complied with, and if not, why not? And to the extent that Moody's is saying that things going forward are going to be negative if the central bank continues to print money, that's rather than Mr. World telling us foolishness and sponsoring calypso shows for Sparrow, do the work, world, that the law says that you must do. Now, the second major matter facing this country, as represented by Moody's, is that our deficit at 11% is twice as bad as it should have been at its worst. And let me put that in context for you. Why did we run the country successfully? To join the European Union, a country should have a deficit of no more than 3% of its GDP. I set a target for Barbados of 2.5% of GDP. That was even better than European countries have had. And we kept Barbados stable through fiscal prudence. And in the last year, deficit about 2% of the GDP. I wouldn't know how to be in the Ministry of Finance and have a deficit of 11% of GDP. And you know, in many ways, my experience in Jamaica has seared things into my psyche that I will never forget. I could tell you where I was sitting in the planning agency in Jamaica when, for example, Michael Manley says that he's going to have free primary, free secondary, and free tertiary education, but he didn't know how he was going to pay for it. And that the deficit reached these kind of proportions. And that's why we're in this trouble. And something has to be done about it. But what? Now, in 2011, when I spoke as Shadow Minister for Finance, I then told Friend Stewart and the DLP that, look, we got to constitute a task force in Barbados, drawn from the best minds in the country, to put in place a program for dealing with the deficit. If the deficit gets out of hand, the country becomes like a pop kite. And that's not meant to be a joke. It becomes just another pop kite. I recently spoke. I hear now, and that's what I want to talk about this evening. I hear now that the International Monetary Fund has a team in Barbados to advise the government again on how to adjust the expenditures of statutory boards and adjust the deficit. And I say to myself, the more things change, the more they remain the same. Because if you will recall, in 1994, in his only budget before then, David Thompson said that they had arrangement with the IMF, and then the IMF knows what they want to do and when, and some other thing of the nature. And when I became the Minister of Finance, there was an IMF gentleman called Mr. Fitzcroco, stationed in Bay Street, doing precisely what this present IMF team has been called in to do, to tell the government how to adjust statutory boards. And Mr. Croco met with me to tell me he had gone through all of the people who live in Fernierhurst and all the people who live in all the government's housing areas. And he had checked their income, and this body live in a warm place is working for X, and the next body working for Y. And I should charge one person X and another person Y. I asked the IMF, please ask Mr. Croco to step off the compound. And I didn't mean that offensively. But the intrusion of the IMF, because the IMF is an institution that can do good work. But I say to you, and I say all that to make the point, that there's nothing that the government of Barbados is calling upon the IMF to do that could not have been done if 3 years ago the government had agreed to put a task force of the best minds in place. And I was invited recently to speak to the people of St. Martin's. They're having little issues, and they invited me to come to talk to them about their development. And I spoke to them in the following terms, which I want to repeat today, as we consider having to deal with the problem of the public finances. I says that the circumstances of small states are such that at any given point in time, only a few key strategic things, a mastery over those few strategic things, will decide whether they will succeed or fail. It is the highest responsibility of leadership to ensure that mechanisms for consultation are put in place to build consensus on the key few strategic things that matter, and to do so in a fashion that confers on all stakeholders a strong and genuine feeling of ownership of the decisions that they help to craft through consultation. And then I went on to say this, that Barbados faces an enormous fiscal problem, and says that a program of fiscal consolidation has been proposed, but call upon the government to build a national consensus on what needs to be done. Because the hardest thing to do in a democracy is to get people to not have access to the services that they have become accustomed to. The government is floundering because it has a problem to fix. Some of the decisions that it will have to make are not only harsh, but will go contrary to precisely what they told the electorate. Frundle told the public servants, "You have my back." You remember that? He probably meant that he was the captain of the Costa Concordia, that he was jumping into the lifeboat first and heading for safe harbor while leaving them to drown out on the sea. He says, "You have my back." But the government has to do difficult things. And as Prime Minister of Barbados, when we had to do difficult things, I recognized that you had to put a consensus together and give all the stakeholders a sense of ownership of the things that need to be done. So bring the International Monetary Fund in here and having a technical assistance program to tell us how to adjust the National Housing Corporation. May give them, I suppose, an excuse to say that the devil made them do it. But it will not get the job done unless there is a national consensus on the matter. And you know, in the last election, and I'm not bitter about it, and there's some people in the Barbados part who feel that I should not have raised some of the issues that they raised there. But they thought we should have had an intelligent discussion on some of the difficult things that had to be done. And I thought that the purpose of an election is to seek a mandate. If you have to do difficult things, take the people into your confidence and build a consensus for what you have to do. I spoke to the public about something called fiscal incentives for social transformation. You remember that? That we should not only have incentives for but short. That the adjustment of the government fiscal position will mean that some of the benefits and services to which we are accustomed may have to go. And our manifesto set out very clearly, and you should read it. I urge you all to read this. It says if the government has to adjust the expenditures, that there are certain entities in Barbados must continue to have free access. The poor, the old, and those, if you doubt me, as a fundamental principle, any program of expenditure management must ensure that the poor, senior citizens, and those with disabilities and those having special needs must and will continue to have free access. I know I'm not saying that difficult decisions must not be done, but we said if they have to be done, protect the poor, the old, the vulnerable. And what we're having now is a government, thank you, son, humbugging everybody, treating everybody as if their circumstances are the same. And today I'm saying, the people having an adjustment of the kind being proposed is not a numbers game. It is not an exercise just in cutting and chopping. It will forever change the nature of the society that we are. Prime Minister Gonzalez recently wrote a paper called The Idea of Barbados. And in it, he stressed that we have become a good society because of our sustained investment in the public services that we don't take for granted and the investment in the social capital. What is being contemplated is not just a fiscal adjustment, but what could, at the end of the day, amount to an assault on the very infrastructural and social foundations on which the stability and the progress of Barbados has been based. This Frondel, this Sinclair, is too big a matter to be handled by a group of people from the International Monetary Fund coming here and giving us technical assistance. This requires a great conversation between the government and the governed. And we need to have it now. And they say that the Labour Party must not be ashamed nor fearful of getting involved in it. 75 years of experience have put us in a position where we have a rich legacy from which to draw. And I ask you to be proud of your manifesto, because it remains the party's policies until at such time as they have a new one. But we were speaking in our manifesto about enabling people to take more responsibility for their own welfare. And what did they tell you? That they feel that in the same way that you give incentives to but short, If you're going to ask people to have to pay for their children's education, give them an incentive so that they can save for their children's education if they are in a position where they have to pay taxes. I call it fiscal incentives for social transformation. That if you can tell people that they have to pay for drugs, give them a health care allowance so that they can offset some of the burdens that are involved now in carrying responsibilities that the state used to carry for them. I was criticized and said they was trying to privatize education and health. But we said, when we met up at Spring Memorial, that education and health care in Barbados is very often largely a private matter. And as Minister of Finance, I had introduced something called a registered education saving plan that allow you to get the interest on any saving plan that you had for your children's education, the interest free. I said, I give you the whole thing as a credit. Let people be able to save for their children's education as well. And I feel that if the government doesn't have the money to pay to build new schools, the private sector is building schools. You can pay for access to the schools. And we went this way, you know. We had to face, as a government, the fact that we are an aging society. And as Minister of Finance, I could not find the money to build new geriatric hospitals. But what did we do? We came up with something called the alternative care of the elderly that tell the private sector, open nursing homes. And the government will buy space in the nursing homes for the old people of the country. We have, and this government has to stop the pronouncements and the announcements. The government of Barbados really can't afford to build a new Queen Elizabeth Hospital. So stop titillating the public with folly. Put in place an arrangement where the private sector can come in and fill the void that the government cannot now fill and give an incentive for the private sector to do it. And the government then can buy access in the new hospital for services that the government itself cannot provide. What's wrong with that? Nothing. Fiscal incentives for social transformation. And that, Frandel, the IMF can't come in here on such an important matter and leave behind a report that you will expect us to implement just so. This is a moment where the society in which we live will be changed forever. And that the people of Barbados must be part, not just the IMF, but the people of Barbados must be now part of a great conversation that helps to shape what kind of society that they will live in and what kind of society they will leave for their children and grandchildren. And I've come, if the IMF want to help, fine. But we are back in the 1994 situation where we cannot just have people stationed from the IMF to tell the government how to adjust expenditures on statutory boards. It is a matter that concerns how we will live. And while we are welcoming people and they're welcome to be here, if the IMF were listening and sensitive, they would understand too that any report that they leave can only be successful if we, the people, and we, the people, feel a sense of ownership of it, and that I can buy into it, and that we have helped to craft the essential policies that will determine the kind of societies in which we live. And I really feel that this is the moment for leadership, and that you have to put together now on this critical matter the consensus, and that we are ready to be part of it. That's why I've come this evening to discuss it. We need to have a national consensus that is Barbadian grown, come from the bowels of this land, from the best brains of the land, as to how we are going to transform the services that the government of this country provides for this generation and for the generation to come after us. And I've come this evening on behalf of the people of St. Peter to say that we are ready to be part of this discussion. We don't want to leave this to the IMF alone. Frandel, do not let the lack of leadership fail this country. I'm also saying that we will fail if our institutions fail us. Barbados' future growth must come from the expansion of the private sector, because the government will be contracting. And I want to say again, this private sector of Barbados will fail the country if it sees itself and its only role as meaning to tell the government what the government should do, but does not meet and come up with a proposal as what are the things that the private sector itself can do to create an environment within growth can take place in this country. I speak about a few. The part of the world that is growing the fastest is sub-Saharan Africa. Can I get a little water, please? And it is growing. And it is growing because a large number of small and micro enterprises are having access to the financial system in Africa. There's a revolution in microfinancing that has been a large number of persons into the economic mainstream. And there are people now who are using the internet and e-commerce and going ahead in South Africa and elsewhere. There's excess liquidity in our financial system because the banks are not lending the government. The government is going to contract, and we must expand the private sector. Why can't the private sector meet among itself and come up with schemes that would enable people who have ideas but don't have the financial resources to be able to have access to credit on new terms to enable them to be part of their own solution? Is that too difficult? And are we hearing these things from the private sector? Why doesn't the private sector people meet with the financial community and come up with new proposals? Immediately after 9/11, my government had to come up with proposals to keep the economy stable. And we told the private sector, come together, and you can help grow Barbados by determining that you can buy things produced in Barbados. You remember the 100% Barbados initiative? Why isn't the private sector doing these things? But I speak about tourism. I am not an expert. New Orleans is the expert. And I wish the Parris party would use him more too. You know, he's down Grenada, helping Grenada. What a strange world. They want arresting to bring back here to help here. Bring back. But the point I'm making is this. The private sector also has to come up with clear views and consistent policies as to how an economy that is more tourism dependent than ever before will grow this country by doing those things that are necessary to make tourism drive our development. And let me talk about a few quickly. If you can build a competitive economy, you must either have cost leadership. We don't have cost leadership. You must either be differentiated from other people, or you must have a clear focus. We must differentiate ourselves, and we must have a sensible and clear focus. We cannot grow tourism if, like Millie, we go to Brazil. We can't. And we must be differentiated as a 5-star product in a 5-star society. That's what can differentiate us from the rest. Because of our wage rates, Barbados cannot go down to mass consumption, discount price tourism. We must have a 5-star product selling. And the government must help to create a 5-star product, but the government must invest in a 5-star society. You cannot have a 5-star product in a society that is not 5-star. And that's why we invested in a large number of things to supplement what the tourism sector was doing. The last thing my administration did was have a thing called the Scotland District Authority. Barbados must be a scenic place to visit. the Scotland district is falling into disrepair. And the quality of what Barbados has to offer as a tourism destination will go if we do not rehabilitate the Scotland district. Isn't that true? So all of the people that were employed in cutting down bush beside the road, not only gone, but could have been usefully employed in the Scotland district, helping to rehabilitate the area so that we can offer our visitors a 5-star product in a 5-star society. In addition, to get tourism right, 2 things must happen. Our people must be able to make returns on the investment. All businesses, big and small, will only be in operation if they can get a return on the investment. And the reason why our tourism sector is failing, and so many have closed and will close, is because people cannot make returns on the investment. Government has to reverse the policies that have deprived the tourism sector of its ability to make returns. So if you are a hotelier and the government increased water rates by 60% and electricity rates by 65% to allow 2 enterprises owned by the government to make money, the Water Authority will make money, the NOC will make money, but the hoteliers will lose. Because there's no way in which you can charge a tourist for the water that you put in a swimming pool. The increase in that water goes straight to your bottom line. Same thing to tell a tourist that you can charge him for turning on the air conditioning. You can't do that. So the government has to reverse. For us to come out of this, the government has to reverse the policies that have put our tourism sector in a situation where Bernie Bennett is saying that the sector can fail. Look, the excise taxes and so on, those things, they're just making Barbados uncompetitive. And the government has to do 2 things. Our sector, our tourism competes in an international environment. Give it a level playing field with the people with whom it competes abroad. That makes sense to you? And if you have to make choices about who you can help in Barbados, you have to create a preference in your policies for your leading sectors. So, for example, we have bone rates on a lot of agricultural commodities, 200%. A lot of them are commodities that nobody in Barbados is producing. So we are protecting things by high rates not produced here, under the guise that we are trying to help manufacturing and agriculture. And all we are doing is destroying tourism. And in our manifesto, it says we will remove the bone rates. Because if you have a choice of policy preference, create the policy preference in favor of your leading sector. The government, Barbados also finds itself, and this will be a subject of debate, there are a lot of constraints that we have put on our tourism sector. And I'm not going to get into all this evening, but starting the discussion that don't exist in other competing jurisdictions. A lot. Our tourism sector is a case of constrained development. For example, and give it the most simple, there are town planning regulations that says that you can't build in Barbados above a certain height. When the crane was being built, I went up there as Minister for Town Planning, and the town planner said to me, Prime Minister, this property is too tall. We got to lick it down. I said, but town planner, how many lick down? I said, change the regulations. That we have regulations about the height of buildings that go back to the 1950s. But the price of land has gone up. So change the regulations. And don't tell people that they can't build above the height of a palm tree. That's foolishness. So change that. And there are other constraints. And given the state that we have reached in Barbados, there now has, I think, to be an intelligent discussion if we are going to have a level playing field and attract investment between investors and producers in Barbados and the conditions that exist in the markets in which they compete. And I want to say this. The policy on which the government is set obviously can't be sustained. Something must tell the government, if it's the government and only the government, that is not the only thing investing in tourism, that is our principal sector, that even in communist Cuba, they're getting private investment in tourism. So that if Barbados cannot attract private investment in its tourism sector, and that it is the government that has now to go in and buy Alma Beach, something has to be wrong with the policies that stop people from seeing tourism as a place for investment. Change the policies. And I believe that the private sector itself must have a consensus on this, because in too many instances, one part of the private sector is saying one thing, and the next part of the private sector is saying another thing, but we need to have a clear sense as to where we're going to take this country to get it out of this present crisis. So that this country is going to fail if the private sector fails us. The country will also fail if the labor movement doesn't get its act together. That is going to be another story, another speech for another time. But I say this evening that Barbados is facing what they call the ordeal of free labor. And the labor movement is taking the workers of this country for a ride. I remember going up to Barclays Park in 2011 and told them that it was within my certain knowledge that the labor movement of Barbados had agreed with the government to a wage freeze and was not going to announce it. And I had told the shopkeepers to go back and tell the workers themselves. And Mr. Maloney, that's his name? He's the fellow at the National Housing Corporation. But he's another one who has jumped in a lifeboat and headed for Safe Harbor while he's sitting home. People are working around him. He is another one, like the captain of the Costa Concordia, too. He is on a lifeboat, advising the government while who working with him must go home. He is on looking for Safe Harbor while other people are sucking salt. This is going to be another speech, because for 14 years, we had to treat the labor movement with respect. I came in, I found a wage cut and a wage freeze, and we started to give wage increases, productivity bonuses. And then they started to complain about working in sick buildings, and we had to build out new buildings for them. And then it went on. I heard that policemen and nurses were working unsociable hours, and that we had to give them flexi allowance. And they gave them productivity bonuses. And they had people employed as casual workers, and said that can't be fair. We abolish casual employment. And the last thing my government did was to carry to Parliament a new Public Service Act that told people that if you were employed for the government for 3 years, they're going to decide whether they can do or not. What is happening in Barbados today would not be accepted of a Labour Party government. And they've come tonight to represent the people of St. Peter, who too are feeling the savagery of a labor movement that are making the working class available to be purchased. What they're going through. That they want to find a painless way to send home 3,000 people. But the only equivalence I can think about, and I don't mean this vulgarly, I believe recently in the United States of America, they tried to put to death a man, and rather than put him to death in 45 seconds, he took 45 minutes before he died. And then they said, but how can we find a humane way to kill people? And I hear the labor movement saying, but how can we help the government to find a decent way to send home 3,000? But it's not something to laugh at. Because like the man who in Oklahoma, people says that 45 minutes is too long, kill him in 45 seconds. The man's still dead. So there's no easy way to send home 3,000 people. But you all are being asked to believe that the labor movement is doing something for you. That they're finding the right process. And Frandel, you should be embarrassed that you're going to meet the labor movement and your issue is, oh, I am 3,000 to go home by the wrong process, so let us send home 3,000 by the right process. But we can't laugh at these things, please. Because they might come out of a meeting, not to tell you I have found a solution, but it's the process, the process. So let us change the process by going home still. They're still going home. And you know, we want, and I say this, there's going to be a new economy. And we want a new approach to the labor movement that does not see Barbados' affairs in strictly partisan terms. Such that when the Labour Party is in office, it believes that it has to bleed the state. But then when the DLP comes to office, that it believes that it can sell out the workers of Barbados. That has to change, man. That's wrong. And that you will not have the people of Barbados motivated to participate in the rescue of this country if the people who should be representing the working class are so politically beholden that they misunderstand what they should be doing right now. And I could not come to St. Peter to speak, and I'm not going to get into partisan difficulties, but to speak to the Labour Party too. That this country will fail if the central bank fails us. It will fail if the leadership of the country fails us. We will fail if the private sector fails us. It will fail if the labor movement fails us. But the country will also fail if the Labour Party fails the country. And I've come this evening not to get involved in any loose talk about issues, but to just tell the Labour Party that we have 75 years of glorious service. And part of that service was that we built the modern economy. It was Grantley Adams at the creation of a development board that laid the foundations for modern manufacturing and tourism as we know it. Many people don't credit Grantley Adams for that. But the structure of the economy that we have inherited started with him. And it was his son, Tom, that came and started the transformation. And for 14 years, the administration that I led, we did things that sometimes were beyond the imagination. Took unemployment at 24% and 6.7%. Growth. Fight against poverty. I thought that by moving the reserves from 387 to 2.4 billion, that had put the specter of devaluation behind us. Transformed taxation, tourism, new initiatives. And what I'm saying needs to be heard. The day after David Thompson became Prime Minister of Barbados, the rating agencies that are now reducing Barbados to junk said that they had met and that there would be no major changes in policies. That they told the government, I want to read it because we just get condemned and their party got bad memory. They said the Standard & Poor's gave Barbados, Owen Arthur's administration, good marks for the way it managed its economy for the past 6 years, you know. and has given Barbados a triple B plus sovereign credit rating, one of the highest in the Caribbean and Latin America. And I tell the David Thompson administration, you're inheriting a good heritage. Don't change it. Don't change. And I say to you, through the Barbados Labour Party, that development is about building upon what you inherit. This present situation facing this country is one in which a government came in and felt that everything that we were doing was wrong. And from the outset, they said, we're going to turn up the apple cart. Against the advice of the rating agencies, tell them, don't make any major changes. And they say to the Barbados Labour Party that I do not expect this party to be frozen in a moment of history. That just as Tom had to make way for a new approach, and I had to, there will be need for new approaches. But build upon what you inherit. And do not believe that everything that went before was wrong. And that there will be a need for this party to understand that the next election will be decided upon the basis of competence. The people of Barbados are facing a crisis, not because of international recession, but because of an ineptitude by government and policy failures. Confidence can only be restored by competence. And the Barbados Labour Party must do two things. Put together a group of candidates that can inspire in the minds of the people the confidence that the team is competent. The word must be competence. And the next thing, of course, is this, that everything that was done in the past was not wrong nor bad. And let us sit down as we think about the future and try to find what is best of the new, but what is best of the past that we can forward with us into the future. And if the Barbados Labour Party is not true to its heritage of competence in the management of our economic affairs, the party will fail, because what will face this party when it becomes the next government is the most overwhelmingly difficult economic exercise that has ever faced any government of Barbados. And that what we have to do is to start to huddle in places within the Barbados Labour Party and to put our heads together and start to go back to this manifesto and say which is what part of it we can keep, and start to put down on paper the things that will make the difference for the future. But it must also be reflected in bringing forward a group of people who can competently lead this country. And let me give some advice, please. I hear from time to time things about on Labour Party platforms that saddens me. When Eric Barr came back as a Prime Minister, he brought back Cameron Trudeau, Neville Boxer, because he understood the virtues of inexperience. Erskine Sandiford spoke last week to the DLP and told them, our army of raw recruits, you need some experience here. When Tom Adams came back, he brought back Neville Boxell. No, sorry. He brought back Emmy Cox and Rommel Mapp. Experience. You don't want people in cabinet fumbling about. And they say to you, the Labour Party, that they would not have been able to put together a successful administration if it didn't have Henry Ford and Bree St. John I didn't tell him to go home. And Billy Miller and David Simmons, who had served in the cabinet before. And David Simmons had been St. John's Attorney General, and I made him mine. Didn't change him. And Billy Miller, the only minister who I never adjusted was my Minister of Foreign Affairs, because when you got a big horse, you have to ride it. Common horses do not win derbies. Thoroughbreds. Billy Miller was a thoroughbred. Robert Marshall served with distinction. Noel Lynch served with distinction. Ronald Toppin, there's no minister who have left a better record than Toppin with Glenn Clark. Well, you know me, I won. We serve on all fronts. We serve on all fronts. Right, Glenn? But I say to you in all seriousness, put together the Barbados Labour Party at every juncture has put together a team, a blend of youthful energy and proven experience. And what lies before us now is that imposing legacy of the Barbados Labour Party, if it is thrown away, will make sure that this party too will be a failed institution that will fail this country. So that I thank you for this opportunity to speak in this way. In 1971, when I finished my courses at University of the West Indies, I left Cayfield campus and came to St. Peter and worked in the Labour Party campaign. Myself and Lloyd Benby managed the campaign. And I worked as a polling agent for the Barbados Labour Party in St. Peter. The people like Welfare World here tonight, Ashford Boys, we go back. And 43 years of service to the Barbados Labour Party in St. Peter has been my life work. And I'm proud of it. And I give the people of St. Peter the assurance that I will do nothing in the rest of my days in public life that will bring into discredit or disrepute that 43 years of service on behalf of the people who I have had the honor to serve. And I look forward